down the road, but just start to get you all thinking about the property itself, what exists there now, what some opportunities are, what some potential development scenarios could be in the future. As we all know, it's an amazing property. It has some incredible environmental features. It has a lot of open space. It has some buildings on the site, good, bad, or indifferent. But hopefully, I'll apologize in advance if this doesn't flow as well as it could. I may jump around a bit, but hopefully at the end it'll all tie together. Just who I am. I think what I bring to the table is a number of years of just a real wide range of experience of doing a lot of different things, large and small, master planning, parks, recreation, environmental, ecological design things. And as of late, with a lot of the trends that are changing towards kind of green technologies and sustainable development, a lot of the new, and hopefully we can talk about that a little bit tonight, but hopefully some of the new development trends are going to benefit this property in addition. These are just some quick things. Just a funny story, about 10 years ago, I was asked to take a look at just a little sliver of this same property. This is when the facility was still active. Won't talk about it because it never went anywhere and doesn't exist. But this just shows a number of things Erie County Parks have worked with, some brownfields redevelopment, master planning within the city and elsewhere, historic plans, Roycroft, Delaware Park, Niagara Falls Main Street. Gotten involved with a lot of work down at Chautauqua, a lot of work for creating rain gardens, bioswales, a lot of things that I think are going to be very important to this piece of property in the future. Master plans. They mean a lot of things, maybe different things to different people, but the most important thing in all cases, you really got to get to know the property. And many of you who live around the site and that have worked there, I talked to a gentleman before tonight that worked at this facility and saw it being developed in its earliest days. Certainly know a lot more than I do about that, so what I probably bring to the table is a little bit more independence, looking at this with fresh eyes, a different perspective. Here's the property. The property as it's been defined, and it is the 439 acres, is shown here. And what I just started to do is started to outline some of the critical features, maybe some of the interesting, unique aspects. Certainly Cazenovia Creek is one of the main physical features of the area in general. The site itself, as we know, is relatively flat, a slight slope to it, and then it drops down into the ravine of the creek, which I do understand had your last presentation, or the first presentation of the workshop series was about the potential of the environmental preserve or set aside along the river. Some physical characteristics are the steep slopes. Now the property itself doesn't necessarily take advantage of these. It's up on the top of the bluff, but these are things to consider in the future with regard to trails and overlooks and maybe a little bit of interface with the creek itself. I also took a look at, just very briefly, the green here represents the open space that exists on the site right now, that being land that is not built upon. And then I broke it down even further. This actually represents two things: mowed lawn, which is extensive. If they want to cut their maintenance budget, that would be a good place to start. And some meadow areas that look like they were previously lawn that have now been reverted back to meadow grasses and otherwise. Then we add on some of the wooded areas and scrub growth areas. These are areas that are either, fairly heavily wooded, or areas that have been reverting back to nature and are fairly thickly vegetated right now. And then, of course, two of the corner features of this area are the two park properties, the Fireman's Park and the Sunshine Park, which present some really unique opportunities, not only for the whole neighborhood as it exists now, but for this development, the potential of connecting these, the potential of connecting these better to some of the environmental areas probably would benefit the site greatly. I also think, that I'm going to beat around the bush a little bit here, but there's a lot of building on the site right now. I don't think any of us can say for certain, how much of that is reusable or desirable to rehabilitate. I understand there is asbestos in some of the buildings, which will be an issue, obviously, for rehab. So I just wanted to show, this is a great resource. This is bing.com. You can all go on this site, and it'll show you aerial photographs, bird's eye views, and you can actually look at your house, and you can turn the view east, west, north, south. And this is all looking from the south to the north. But this is the site as it exists today. And you can see there's a lot of buildings. We'll look around those buildings. There's a lot of open space. This is the corner where the water tower and the Sunshine Park is. Some of the development, now I understand that the development on the left side is the development that'll stay active. That's the 71 acres.
Right.
Here's the middle of the site, the core property. Here's the most densely developed part of the property as it exists today. You have a good crop of deer in there too that I'll show you in a second, that are now kind of taking over that middle area. And here's the northernmost part of the property, which is absolutely beautiful, a great environmental resource for the entire area and region. As a start to any master plan, you generally start to look at a lot of the issues, opportunities. You look into these surrounding contexts. I'll go through these a lot more in a little bit. You assess the environmental systems. Soils will be important to look at. Any historical aspect of this site, whether or not it needs any historical studies done, and that could mean, settlement, post-settlement historical studies, and certainly and I understand there was a lot of talk on that. I heard that you went back 10,000 years, so I'm not going back 10,000 years tonight. Market conditions. Any developer has got to be realistic and know what the market can bear. Zoning, land use, I know you've talked about a lot of that in the past. And I guess the question that we're going to continue to ask, and you should continue to ask anybody, is will any project be sensitive enough to the surroundings and to the setting itself? Will it fit? Surrounding context, critical to any master plan. Maybe this area is a little unique in the fact that it's pretty much surrounded 100% by residential uses and obviously environmental areas. And that is unique because a lot of areas you'll find a commercial pocket or an industrial or something going on, that this is pretty much a residential area. You have the two park properties, which are important. So that becomes important to the town in terms of like a carrying capacity of recreation for the town. Is there enough recreation existing? Are there more soccer fields needed? On and on. You can begin to assess this property in terms of what might be needed in the future. Characteristics of the site. This is where I come in as a landscape architect and look, if I were to redevelop this site, there's a lot of aspects of the site that would be worthy of preservation and keeping, and then there are more desirable areas for development. Well, let's not put more desirable, easier areas to develop. And I always get a kick out of the developers who go into a wooded property, name it Wooded Acres, and then cut down all the trees. So hopefully there's a lot of space here to do a lot of a good balance of uses. A lot of just wide open flat land. Slight rolling topography. Groupings of trees. There are not a lot of trees in the center of this site. So what is there? And there is some significant age to some of them. I mean, if the property was started in 1961-ish, early 60s, I would think that a lot of these trees are at least gaining 50 years of age in the center of the site. There are areas in the site that are beginning to revert back to nature, and these are great environmental areas. These are great bird habitats. These are great wildlife habitat areas that may want to be looked at in terms of securing for the future. Here's some more of those existing natural areas. Now these are on the site itself. I'm not really going to talk tonight about areas off the site, so I'm pretty much staying on the site itself. And an important thing to point out here when you talk about environmental systems is they are just that. It's important to make a system out of these. So if you look back at the aerial photograph, you'll actually see like green swaths through the site. Those are either drainage areas or wetland areas or different systems that connect. And especially when development starts to take over an area like it certainly has in a lot of West Seneca, the deer and the different wildlife look for these areas to channel and to walk through. These are good views of certainly great development potential, but they're also beginning to take on that natural, reverting back to nature character. There are wooded areas on the site. Tough time of year to show a lot right now, but I can only imagine in the summer, spring and summer and fall, some of these areas are beautiful. Buffer areas. This is I looked pretty carefully around the perimeter of the site, and there are a lot of existing wooded buffer areas, which, if you live on the perimeter, it becomes that already built-in buffer to what might happen in the center of the site in the future. Here's another, looking at one of the buffer areas. I think this is on the north side along the creek side. And as we start to think about a master plan kind of holistically, comprehensively, this is, I think, where you're going to go in your next step is to generate those ideas, that program of uses, that strategy for redevelopment of this property. Big question. When you drive around that site, there are a lot of buildings. Are they worthy of reuse? Will there be a facilities study done to look at the potential for reuse? Demolition is costly, but sometimes it's cheaper to demolish and rebuild than it is to rehab. The cost item that'll probably put some of these out of reach will be some of the environmental problems, if there is asbestos involved. Here are some of the other buildings on the site. So the big question is, can these be worked into a future development scenario? And is it desirable to do that? There's a serious system of roads already existing. Can those be reused in a development scenario? I'd like to say yes, but it depends on the type of development we're looking at. And infrastructure. That means everything, roads, but there's a system of pipes, and I understand there's problems with the sewage system in this part of the town, correct? Mm-hmm. That needs to be dealt with at some point in the future, and will also become a constraint on the future development aspect of this site. So infrastructure, here are some of the roads. A lot of pavement, a lot of areas that certainly, if I were looking at this site and coming up with development options, that would probably be one of the first things I'd look at, is what can be reused. And just, you can't help but look around and see a lot of nature when you're driving around. This was just, I think, 1/8 of the deer that I saw when I drove around the other day. Turkey, deer, and I'm sure there's a lot more things running around out there that obviously need space and take advantage of space. Here I thought I was being pretty ingenious taking this photo. They thought they were hiding, by the way. Features. Western New York is not known for a lot of landform and features. It's a very flat territory. But when you do come across these creek corridors and escarpments and things, it really helps to transform this into something a lot more special. And on the upper right-hand picture, that is on the east side of the Lydecker Creek Bridge, the bridge over the creek. And the lower left-hand corner is looking due west. So our site, the development center site, would be to the left side. And to take advantage of nature systems and creek access projects and trails that are already existing. I think the whole idea is to tie everything together eventually. Certainly we need to recognize the lowlands, the floodplains, the wetland areas. I noticed on the site itself there's only one area that I noticed was dedicated as either a state or federal level wetland, and that's just a tiny pocket. This is an Erie County map that just shows the floodplain of Cazenovia Creek. Now all of that happens below those steep banks on the site. And I don't have a little pointer, but on the far left side of the site, just above the lower white box, the lower left, you'll see a little brown circle. And that's the wetland area that at least on the Erie County site, that's the only one that I picked up. There may be more, but those are the only ones that are recognized state and federal right now. Interesting topography. I just got done saying that Western New York's a pretty flat place until you get south of West Seneca and down into the hilly country. So, we should appreciate what we have. The lower left picture, I'm obviously down in the creek floodplain area where the creek, the road goes down and crosses the creek and back up. And the upper right-hand corner, I'm actually up on the site, on the north side of the site, looking down one of the little ravines that goes down into the creek, and you can see the creek through the picture. So there's a lot of interesting settings and vistas on the site as it exists now. Opportunities and constraints. A big part of master planning will be to determine just that. What are the opportunities and what are the constraints that will hamstring, which will limit a lot of the development opportunities. We already talked about the sewer system in this part of town. It may not be possible under the current scenarios to build a lot of houses on this site. It may not be possible to build a heavy, dense population on this site just because the town systems might not really allow it. Asbestos, I said the buildings currently, some of them, I will say, I don't know which and how many, but asbestos will be an issue in some of the buildings for rehab. And then I'm calling it a constraint for a developer, but the fact that there's a single land use around this site tends to steer you away from putting an alternate land use on this site. For instance, a light industrial park or a big commercial park or an office park. Now, I'm not saying you can't do some mixed use in here, but the area around it, if that is to dictate anything, it's very low density, very residential, and very open in a lot of cases. Opportunities, habitat, open space preservation. There's a lot of land here, and there's a lot of really nice environmental systems to look at for the future. Connectivity, not only between the two parks that I mentioned, but also, you know, in the future, connecting the parks to the creek, the parks to other parts of town, creating a whole network of trails and nature trails and bike trails and things that people can actually make use of and take advantage of. Great scenic vistas overlook potential up on this property overlooking the creek. It's almost a no-brainer for any type of development. And as an opportunity, there's a lot of land, there's a lot of built-in buffers. I'm thinking that there can be a lot of things happening here that don't cause a lot of impact on some surrounding uses. Zoning, I know you had a whole workshop on zoning, so I won't really go into it, but zoning is one of those things that can, well, it can certainly dictate the future, but right now it's a residential zone. There are opportunities for any town to revisit zoning, change zoning if needed, but we certainly have an opportunity here to look at zoning as a way of either controlling growth or guiding development. And then the big question would be, should it be modified to fit a new use or need? And this is maybe where I want to be loud and clear. You know, we're now 2012. A lot of things have changed over the years. There's a lot of things that happen today that didn't happen a few years ago, even with regard to a lot of town development codes. Old-fashioned, I'll use the term old-fashioned policies, a lot of those are being changed throughout the country just to update. A lot of sustainability is now coming into a lot of these policies that didn't exist before. Green development, I'll talk about in a second, but these are things that weren't even considered a few years ago that are now becoming a mandate for a lot of regions of the country and states all over the country. And if we continue, and this is a well-known fact, if we continue developing under some of these traditional zoning codes, especially in the suburb areas, the land is just continuously being eaten up. So, having said that, creativity. There's a lot of ways that we can look at preserving open space, preserving natural systems, preserving the environment, and developing it in a sensitive way. And it's nothing new to a lot of areas of the country. It's not done a lot in Western New York, but cluster development is something that the town should seriously consider. And that can be done in a number of ways. That can be done through overlay zoning districts or just looking at part of town. But what cluster development means is if you have a large property, I think that's an indication. The map that Evelyn pointed to on that side of the room is under a traditional development scenario, whereas if you had, and I'm just going to guess, 2-acre lots, 1-acre lots, basically you could put 1-acre lots across this whole property, 439 acres, and have a house every square inch, you know, with a little backyard and a little fence. What that does, it's great for some, and it takes away all of your character and your open space and your environmental aspects that you currently see out there today. What a cluster development does is takes a density that is predetermined, and rather than spreading it across the whole site, it pushes that development into certain areas of the site in a little bit of a tighter fashion. And as a result, it maintains or retains a lot of that open area and woodland area forever in most cases, and that's what you would want. And what happens is the value of those homes and properties, although they're smaller, the value goes much higher because they now have an open space, an environmental property adjacent to them in perpetuity. So it's a very interesting, creative way to balance a lot of the issues of development and master planning. Green infrastructure. I don't think West Seneca will be able to move forward without considering a lot of these things. Certainly sustainable development options, stormwater runoff. I know the city of Buffalo is going to, changing to green codes. Those are, it's no longer acceptable to just take your water from your house or your property and dump it right into a drain. You've got to treat that water somehow. And in a bigger development, it's easy to do that through bioswales and rain gardens. These are areas that essentially look like wetland areas that allow the water, which would be a, quote, dirty water, to go into these areas, and through a system of slowing the water down and the plants absorbing a lot of this water, it cleanses the water as it goes through, and then eventually, if needed, it goes into a pipe or into a creek or something down the road. But the best scenario is for that to permeate back into the soil. Native plantings, that's the big buzz now, but it works. Rather than planting a lot of exotic and plants that are not conducive to Western New York or West Seneca, what you do is plant things that are native to the area. It attracts a lot more wildlife. It attracts a lot more good things in terms of the environment. Solar farms, wind power, all of these things I'm not going to go into, but are all things that are now out there as options for developers. I'm working on a project up in Potsdam where they're building a big solar farm. They call them farms. They're just it's a field of solar panels that will essentially give power the entire student housing development. So there's a lot of good opportunities out there. And these are just some questions I wanted to raise. Can the property serve many needs and purposes? And that tends to mean mixed use. That will be something that you guys maybe in the next workshop will begin to talk about. Should it be a balance of uses rather than having all housing in there, or all nature preserve, or all something? Can it be a little of many things? Can it bolster the tax base? I know there's a lot of people concerned about tax bases and getting more people on the tax rolls. Can this bolster the tax base in the town of West Seneca while still preserving a lot of that open space? Now that's where your cluster development and cluster zoning comes in as a viable option. And can we establish, environmental conservation easements? These are easements that may be privately owned, but you can't build on them because we're leaving. I think Spalding Lake, there are certain communities around Western New York that have these already, where there's a wooded area in your backyard that you technically own, but you can't do anything with it because that's part of a larger contiguous system. And my answer to all of these could be or should be yes. I think we can do a lot of things here and balance a lot of things. And this is not for West Seneca in particular, but this is for, I'd say, Western New York in general. We've got a lot of the same out there. We've got a lot of similar residential subdivisions. You can go into certain subdivisions and not know if you're in West Seneca or Cheektowaga or Amherst. I think we need to get a little more creative, especially with a property opportunity like this, where we're talking about 200 plus acres of future opportunity. Being unique, being creative. Now, developers get it. I mean, if the market is driving what they can do, they have to start to look at new opportunities. But I think the town can take a very proactive role in demanding that whoever eventually takes over this property give you something a little more special than just the same thing that you've got down the street or a few miles away. And I'm pretty much going to close up now, but I wanted to show you a project that I worked on down at the Chautauqua Institution that has really become a model for a lot of developers around, and that is transforming a large paved area into pretty much a rain garden and nature park in the meantime. This is a property within the institution grounds down at Chautauqua, 2+ acres of asphalt on a slope that currently or previously was just dumping water, running water right into these pipes, and you could literally see the pipes flow right into Chautauqua Lake. And that's the oil, that's everything that the cars bring with it. And what we did through a development project which included a building, this is what was happening. This is what is there now today. We captured all of the runoff from the surrounding areas, including all of the uphill properties that you have the ability to do here, and funneled them essentially through a series of rain gardens and little bioswales, and we turned it into a feature and made them little waterfalls and whatnot. All the runoff from the roofs of the building and even a couple of the surrounding buildings runs through this system, which has essentially turned itself into a little wetland area. But the light blue arrows show the water that is being fed into this new development project. The dark blue arrows show the water, how it flows through the site. And what it's doing as it's flowing is basically cleansing itself. There are plants that are helping to make that happen. And so we took a 2-acre parking lot and we've essentially transformed it into a little nature park. It's all native plantings. It's all fed by rainwater, no irrigation, no need for that, no lawn mowing, lots of seasonal interest. These are all native plantings, a lot of great things. These are things that you guys can consider for your own homes, or certainly for this new development, but just different seasons. This is only 3 years old at this point. This is last fall. This is this past winter. That was one, I think, of 2 snowfalls they had down there. But, and this is just picture the photograph previous to this would have been an asphalt parking lot. This is the project being built. This is the rain garden starting to be developed. Now we got a lot of water as we were developing it, so that was not necessarily a great thing, but it worked. This is as it's being developed. And down there, all development has to happen, you know, kind of off-season. So this essentially started in April, and we had to be out of there by early June. So the entire project was done in about a 2 to 2.5 month period. This is the project being developed. This is 2 months later. This is the next spring. This is, I'm saying season 4, but it's year 3. This is the 4th summer. And essentially it's, you can see how nature can kind of take over things. And that's how it looks recently. So the reason I showed you those last few pictures is just to show what opportunities are out there, what things are being done out there. It's a tough call these days to put more burden on town systems. I know the city of Buffalo's in dire straits with a lot of its old piping systems that just can't handle the runoff anymore. So all of these things need to be considered as a part of a master plan for, you know, West Seneca here on this property. So I'm sure I jumped all over the place and gave you a lot of information, but I really look forward to hearing what you guys as a group kind of come up with in the future. And any questions or comments, concerns?
There are, you know what though? It's Chucky here. Can we just turn the lights up? Somebody grab the lights, just so we can see. I actually had a question.
Sure.
On the Chautauqua, actually, you know what? I'm going to try to use this in case. Okay. Okay.